My name is Joseph Kammerer, and my rank was Senior Executive Level 6, the highest level. This was about the buckling of long, slender ships due to wave-induced whipping. What happens to these carriers when they're out there in the deep seas, and especially in storms, is they pitch a lot. They go way down in the water, and the front, being of the shape it is, with a very narrow part, the water comes up with the ship. That they go down, and now the water is coming up with the ship, and it increases the mass of the ship as it does that. So you have to take that into account when you start thinking about buckling of ships. Also, when the ships were coming back from World War II, there were some very large damages that were taken around the Cape Horn in Africa, I believe it was, where the 4-inch steel decks of these carriers was actually buckling, And so the forces out there at the sea had to have been tremendous to cause that. And so we had people at the David Taylor Model Basin that was working on that, and I worked with them, spent 6 months over there working on that project. And then I ended up writing a paper on the buckling of long, slender ships due to wave-induced whipping. And that paper was with a Navy captain named Heller, and he had his PhD in vibrations and stuff, and so we wrote this paper together and presented it at a technical society in Illinois. But basically it said, we need to pay attention to this aspect of whipping and need to talk about what would we do to the design of the ship in order to keep this buckling from happening. And we came up with a lot of things, and what we did was sending people out from the David Taylor Model Basin to measure all this stuff. And they did, and we were able to take those it's all through the book, all through the paper here, where we took their actual readings and were able to derive from that what we can do. And one of the things that we decided on was, if these ships are going to see that kind of sea, first of all, we can change the design a little bit of the front of the carrier to accommodate that. But secondly, you're going to have something in there for the commanding officer, an electronic device that tells him, hey, you're about ready to enter the seas, or you are in the seas that are going to be very dangerous for your ship, and you should take action to get out of there. And so that was our contribution in the paper, to say, hey, this is what we need to have. And after that, they had that, and they still have it today. The design of the actual piece I did not do. I did the analysis of looking at the buckling phenomenon, but I didn't design the electronic piece because that was going to be designed by electronic engineers. It's still used on carriers. Well, I went also out on the Kennedy. It was an aircraft carrier, and that was just an invitation from a 3-star who used to work for me when he was a captain. And he said, why don't you come out and watch the night operations on the Kennedy, and watch how all the planes get set to go and so forth, and how people land on a thing and so forth. And it was a marvelous experience. I slept in John Kennedy's bedroom because he wasn't there. Well, I went to Norfolk, and they flew me out to the ship in a helicopter. And my impression was, oh my God, I've never seen something this large in my life. This thing is going out to sea and flying airplanes off it. This is unbelievable, And I tried to get from one end of that ship to the other end of the ship to look at it and see what it was like. Very difficult, because it was so large. I mean, there were 5,000 people on that ship that running the ship and running all the things that had to be done on the ship, the stores, the eating, and everything else. And it was like a city, like a little city. And the commanding officer, get to be a commanding officer or something like that, you've really got to be good. I was really impressed with him and with his whole top echelon of officers that ran the ship. But what a magnificent piece of work that carrier was. Still producing them too. As you come into the ship, usually you're escorted to I was escorted to the top of the ship and introduced to the commanding officer. And his whole area up there is huge. It's a circular kind of area where he and duty officer of the day would be there. And then they would take me down a few steps to where the bunking for the officers was. And they were very, the commanding officer had two cabins. One that was up there right next to the area where he had to command, and the other was very nice posh digs down below, and since nobody was staying there, he offered me those digs to stay in. So it was very, it was beautiful. And there were things in that ship that the Kennedys had asked to be in that ship. There was this big, beautiful ornamental piece of wood that was in the captain's quarters that was absolutely beautiful. And there were other things around the ship that reflected what they wanted to have on the ship. The captain's quarters, I have to say, were probably more lush than they would have been had it not been the Kennedy, you know. But and then you know, what was so impressive was watching the nighttime operations, because here you get out there where you could see what's going on, and you'd see this light way far in the dim, you know, approaching, and finally come down on the ship. And boy, I kept thinking to myself a couple things. One is they had these huge big wires across the deck, you know, slow the plane down. I kept thinking to myself, and I asked some people about it, and I said, do those cables ever break, you know, and who designs them so they won't break? And they told me of a situation where one of the cables went when a ship came down, and one of the sailors was in the wrong spot. He got killed because of that. I also heard, right after coming to Vincent Hall here, of some parents of a naval officer whose airplane came down into the carrier, but he didn't make it. And he crashed into the back of the carrier and killed himself. But that was I never heard anything like that, never saw anything like that. When I was out there, every one of these planes came down perfectly, got into the wire. Every one of them took off just great. It was a marvelous thing to watch. Now, my job responsibility was basically to observe the aircraft operations, to observe the condition of the ship and how it reacted to waves and that kind of thing. Yeah, and there was another time when I went out on a surface ship. It was a cruiser, and at that point I was working on vibrations, and it was my job to go up and get to the top of the ship and measure the vibrations against stuff up there. So I had to do that and come back with the data. Because we'd analyze some of the data right on ship.